All right, let's welcome into Straight Fire, a guy who covers college football, covers everything, really. He's also basically a tennis pro. I mean, I'm waiting for him to enter the tour, but first he's got to cover the big national championship, Notre Dame, Ohio State. Dan Wolken, USA Today. How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing great, Jason.
Yeah, you excited for the game? What's the interest level on your end? I mean, you get Big Ten and you get a heavyweight independent. Couldn't ask for much more, right? No SEC for the second straight year.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about the brands of Notre Dame and Ohio State, I think those are probably two of the top four for sure in terms of just fan base size, general intrigue, star power. Uh, Notre Dame obviously touches a lot of different groups across the country. Um, you know, they've become likable all of a sudden, which, they were always kind of the team everybody hated.
What does that
And
have
then
to do with the coaching change, maybe?
I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just a totally different vibe over there now. And then you've got Ohio State, which I think is just a very interesting story given the way their season played out, the entire narrative around Ryan Day. And the other thing about Ohio State is just there's Ohio State people everywhere, absolutely everywhere across the country. It's such a huge school with a huge reach. So yeah, I'm sure ESPN's thrilled with this matchup. I know it's going to be interesting to cover, and you never know, but let's hope it's a good game.
Yeah. All right. We could dig into the game shortly. Let me just cover a couple of macro issues. So we're recording this on Wednesday. Quinn Ewers just announced he is not going to enter the transfer portal. He's going to try the NFL. I am curious. I heard Michigan State, Oregon, Notre Dame, all were interested. Obviously, some other people were bandying around numbers like four, five, $6 million. I don't know. I'm just curious what you heard on your end about Quinn Ewers.
Well, certainly those rumors were out there that some school, maybe multiple schools, were potentially going to have multi-million dollar offers ready for him in the transfer portal. And probably true. I mean, look at what Carson Beck's
Yeah.
situation was at Miami, supposedly making somewhere around $4 million next year to play at Miami for a guy who I didn't think had a very good year at Georgia. He was okay. Also, by the way, coming off major elbow surgery,
Yeah.
which I think has got to be a concern for a quarterback. So you just don't know what you're going to be getting with him. I think you have to ask yourself, is Quinn Ewers in the NFL next year going to be making in that $3 million range? I don't
Hmm.
think so. I mean, maybe the way the process plays out, people fall in love with him. Maybe he tests well, interviews well. And as we know, teams always get kind of desperate for quarterbacks as the draft gets closer.
Oh,
So
yeah.
maybe somebody gives him a shot in the second round or end of the first. But based on kind of everything we've seen so far, I don't think he's a first 2 day pick, which
Yeah.
means he could probably make more money in college. But I can also understand wanting to just move on and get to the NFL. He's already made
Yeah.
a lot of money, by the way.
Yeah, he made a lot of money. I think didn't even play it down at Ohio State. Is that right?
He played like maybe a little bit. I don't know how many plays, but I think he appeared, maybe one or two games.
Mm,
Wasn't
okay.
much.
You mentioned Carson Beck. Let me drill down on that one. You were generous. I thought he was horrendous this year. Now the chatter is that he went to Miami. I guess he's dating one of these social media influencers who goes there,
Yes,
and
yes.
Miami had a lot of success with Cam Ward. So they're like, hey, we got to duplicate that. But I don't. Where are you on Beck? Because he was a bit of a letdown.
Yeah, I think if you maybe talk to people around Georgia, you could point the finger at the offensive line was a real disappointment there this year, which you saw in that game against Notre Dame.
Mm.
They also had receivers who weren't amazing at catching the ball. So I think you could look at it and say the circumstances were maybe not in Beck's favor.
Mhm.
Still, he didn't play well. And we've seen quarterbacks who did not have good offensive lines, did not have good receivers, who still looked better than he looked. So, yeah, I think you could make different arguments
Mm.
about it. I don't think he'll be as good at Miami as Cam Ward was.
Yeah.
It's a pretty high bar to clear. I don't think he's, from an investment standpoint of whoever's paying that, going to pay off as much as he's making. But hey, good luck to him. And certainly if you want to write what happened this season off as just a bad year, he was certainly highly rated before that. Maybe he bounces back. You
Mm.
never know.
And he lost McConkey and Bowers,
Yeah,
who
sure.
have shown to be awesome pros so far. So those are big. Last one, SEC. A lot of hand wringing, if you will, in the SEC. Somebody tried to sell me that, oh, listen, it was just a quarterback thing. Georgia was down to its backup quarterback. Okay. Jalen Milroe, new system at Alabama. We just didn't have the quarterbacks. The kid at Vanderbilt was one of the best quarterbacks in the conference. And so maybe it was a down year at quarterback, or is the playing field being leveled, do you think, with the transfer portal? And if I'm a backup at Georgia, why don't I just go start at Minnesota or wherever?
Yeah, well, the narrative around the SEC's dominance for so many years was always about the athleticism and the physicality of their players and especially on the lines. And we saw in all these playoff games, whether it was Tennessee against Ohio State, whether it was Georgia against Notre Dame, whether it was Texas against Arizona State, these were not SEC teams that physically dominated people. And so I think that is a statement that the SEC has come down a little bit. Everybody's come up. And I do think the reason is because of the transfer portal and NIL. And it's not just that has given the opportunity for Ohio State and all of these northern schools to go out and pay for and compete for talent that maybe the SEC was going to get. But what you're also seeing is kind of an SEC on SEC crime situation where Ole Miss, they've invested a lot in NIL.
Yeah.
So, maybe they take a guy here, a guy there who would have otherwise gone to Alabama or Georgia or LSU. Same thing with South Carolina. They're doing well in terms of NIL, and they've got a very talented team. Tennessee, like you kind of go down the line. Missouri's getting some guys who clearly would have gone to other, SEC powers, whether they be LSU, Texas A&M, Alabama. So it's maybe not a deluge of talent that's spreading out, but you're just picking a guy here, a guy here, a guy there, and it's kind of bringing everybody more toward the middle. And I think that's what we're seeing in the SEC.
And you think that's good or bad for college football? Like a lot of parity, if you will.
Oh, I think it's good. Look,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, right? Like I think the national championships are nearly all going to be won by the big schools. Maybe one year you get an off-brand that does it, right? They just hit the right group with experience and a great quarterback, like Washington almost did last year, as an example. But I think most of the time, yeah, it'll be your Ohio States, it'll be your Notre Dames, it'll be your Georgias, and we'll see what happens with Alabama. I look, the SEC is going to bounce back. Like they're going to have better years and better teams in the future for sure. But I think it's definitely cool that we can go into a season with more possibilities, go into a playoff without sort of the resignation that it's going to be Clemson, Alabama for the fourth year in a row, like we saw at one point. So, yeah, I think it's good. And I think all the metrics we've seen around college football this year back up that people really enjoyed it.
Yeah. One more that just came listening to your argument. So the little guy, I'm rooting for the little guy. I thought Arizona State coached a great game from Dillingham.
Yeah.
Not early, but there was some trick plays, some interesting stuff out, shall we say. I didn't see that from Boise and SMU. I felt like they were coaching scared, happy to be there, almost like, we don't want to screw this up. Did you get that vibe? Because it feels like the little guy is going to have to pull more of the Kellen Moore Boise hook and ladder, Statue of Liberty. They're going to need that to compete with the big boys.
Well, for sure. I mean, I think these first round playoff games, people were complaining because they weren't competitive. And I get that. Like, it's going to weed out some teams that probably just aren't quite in the same category talent wise as everybody else. Doesn't mean they didn't deserve to be in the playoff. I was fine with everything that happened. We see that in the NFL. Most of the first round games this year, the wild card games were not very good, right? So that's just the way it is. Arizona State did play really well, and they have a tremendous quarterback in Sam Levitt, and obviously Cam Scadaboo played one of the great individual games from a running back you'll ever see. So like they had a couple dudes that allowed them to kind of go blow for blow with Texas. And I do think you'll see that kind of team sometimes, right? Like a team that's just got a couple like really awesome stud players who can make things happen. and all of a sudden you're in the fourth quarter and it's kind of a back and forth game. Like
Yeah.
I think that kind of thing is actually repeatable.
I totally agree. All right, let's get to Notre Dame, Ohio State. Ohio State is a huge favorite, and understandably so. However, if you, depending on what you're reading on the internet, there is a case or two to be made for Notre Dame. A lot of people want to point to the game last season in South Bend. Now, a lot was different. No Jeremiah Smith. Kyle McCord was at quarterback. Um, that game was close, but were you there by any chance?
No, I was not at that one. Yeah, I watched
Okay.
it on television. That was the game that Ryan Day called out Lou Holtz.
Yes, indeed. And frankly, Ryan Day nearly blew the game at the end on that last game-winning drive. Notre Dame screwed up and only had 10 guys on the field on the goal line touchdown run with like what 5 seconds left. So Notre Dame was right in that game. I'm just curious, do you think they can make this competitive? Because the history of the college football championship has been blowout city.
Yeah, I think they can make it competitive. I'd certainly like their chances better if they had a couple more guys who, stayed healthy throughout this playoff. They've been hit hard by injuries throughout this thing, probably harder than anybody.
Mm.
And it's just hard to know, how healthy they're going to be. But, they've done a good job overall kind of making up for those losses. And I think that shows what a great job Marcus Freeman has done with the depth at Notre Dame. They've done I think a really nice job with that roster to be able to withstand some of these injuries. But I feel like Ohio State not only is more talented, they're healthier.
Yeah.
But the question is, I think for them, can they avoid a situation like last week where against Texas they committed a lot of penalties? When everyone was calling for Jeremiah Smith to get the ball more, and that's fair, but I'm not sure what you're supposed to do when it's 2nd and 20, right? And so they had a lot of 2nd and 20 in that game. And I just feel like if they can stay out of their own way, they're going to be in good shape offensively. I just don't know if they can really do that.
Yeah. The Notre Dame injuries are interesting. Again, I got a buddy who I play hoops with who was quarterback at Notre Dame. I got a good buddy who played another sport there. So I'm rooting for them. But I'll be honest with you, man. I I didn't think they were necessarily the better team against Penn State. They got extremely fortunate that Drew Allaire threw an awful pass with like
Yeah.
30 seconds left. Okay. And then you look the week prior and I don't know. They faced a backup quarterback. They did almost nothing. I think they threw for 90 yards other than the bang bang right before that. What do they call it? The middle eight with the
Yeah.
fumble where Georgia with the backup quarterback probably should have just taken a knee or run it out. And then the kick return and boom, that's the game. So it's not like Notre Dame has been awesome. And I just wonder if people are fooling themselves into thinking this could be close and Ohio State's going to steamroll them.
Very well might be the case. Yeah, it's amazing when you think about the way those two games played out for Notre Dame. Like you mentioned, Georgia, Kirby Smart makes a decision to get real aggressive with only 30 seconds left in the half, which I thought was crazy when you look at the fact that they were playing a quarterback without much experience. What does he do? He turns the ball over, hands Notre Dame a touchdown, and that's kind of the difference. I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that one play decided the game, but that play changed the way the game was played, and certainly changed it in Notre Dame's favor. And then you look at last week. Frankly, I thought Penn State should have been content to take that game into overtime. When
Mm.
you look at the way Drew Aller was playing and the fact that their receivers were completely invisible in that game,
Yeah.
I was sitting there watching the game actually with my dad, and I said right before that drive, I said, if I'm Penn State, I go super conservative here because I do not trust Drew Aller to keep the ball out of danger. And what happens? He throws that pick, and it allows Notre Dame to essentially win the game. And
Yeah.
and so that's two coaching decisions, kind of 50-50 calls that really blow up on both of those teams and play huge roles in Notre Dame winning. Now, I'm not saying that they don't deserve to be there because they certainly do, but I think the odds of them getting the same type of quarterback performance from Will Howard and from Ohio State it's probably pretty
Yeah.
low.
Well, wait a minute. So was Will Howard just not great, or was it the penalties, or did Texas maybe unlock something? Hey,
Well,
you straight
yeah.
up double team Smith. I saw a couple of videos where it looked like they had three guys near Jeremiah Smith to shut him down, and that you hung around. Like now, they didn't win the game, but they were in position in the final couple of minutes to maybe tie it. So, is there something that they could have put on film defensively that Notre Dame can mimic?
Yeah, well, I certainly think they're going to try to play the same kind of defense on Jeremiah Smith that Texas did, and that makes sense, right? But I'm not sure how much that matters because Ohio State does have so many other guys, right? You're talking about Igbuka and you're talking about Tate and G Scott. Like they've got so many guys who are going to be playing on Sunday that they can throw the ball to. They've also got Judkins and Trey Henderson. Like they're stacked
Yeah.
on offense beyond belief. And so even if you take out Jeremiah Smith, like they have other ways to beat you. I think the penalties were just crushing. I mean, they had 6 or 7 drives that maybe could have turned into something that ended up they just stepped on the rake. And you can't do that when you're playing a good defense. Texas is a really good defense.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame is as well, right? So I think if they can stay in front of the chains and not get in those second and third and longs all night long, Will Howard will function and he'll fit the ball into tight windows like he did last week. But yeah, just when you're outside of your play calling groove for Chip Kelly, I don't really know what you're supposed to do there.
Yeah, it almost feels like Notre Dame's best path is, hey, take the opening kickoff, 12 play, 75-yard drive, whatever it is, just hold on to the ball, keep away with Love in your run game, which is very strong. But Ohio State's defense is awesome. Like Tennessee could do nothing. Like that game was over in felt like 8 minutes. And that's the problem. Ohio State is loaded. I go back to the Michigan game, and I feel like, and this is going to sound nerdy, but that loss had to happen, Dan, because it unlocked so much. This looks like a totally different team than the team that played against Michigan. And I wonder if Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, like, did they have a moment where they were like, hey, we got to just open this up. Forget this running into the middle of the defense stuff.
Yeah, I think it's just mental, really, for Ohio State when they've played Michigan the last few
Oh,
years.
yeah.
And I think it starts with this idea that the first time they played Michigan, or the first time they lost to Michigan, I should say, this narrative started to form that they were soft, right? That they were this finesse team and that Michigan was kicking their butt in the trenches. And so then the next year and subsequent to that, Ryan Day and that whole program sort of reoriented everything around the idea of we've got to get more physical, we've got to get tougher. And you know what? I actually think that's helped them as a program because when you look at how they play defense, when you look at bringing in Jim Knowles, they are a lot tougher physically than they were. But when it comes to playing Michigan, it almost feels like instead of playing the game, they're there to try to prove a point. And that doesn't really work out well.
Yeah.
And I just think that after that game ended, they knew they were going to be in the playoff. It didn't really matter. I think that burden was just sort of lifted off of them. And it's like, all right, let's just be us. We don't have to pretend to be somebody we're not. And they're not going to out physical Michigan. That's just not how their program's built. But they are tough. And I think they do play physical football and they're great on defense. But they do have to play to their type and to their personality and to their character. And I think that's why they've been successful in this playoff.
If Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, 35-10, easy route, offense looks great. What are the odds that they are a package deal to, say, the Jacksonville Jaguars or something?
Oh, my
because,
God.
hey, you won a national championship, nothing left to prove. They're going to have a ton of guys go to the league. Obviously, they replenish, but I'm going to do this with both coaches. But let's start with Day and Chip Kelly. Like, listen, man, Ryan Day, every loss to Michigan, we got to get him out of here. They were ready to fire him 2 months ago.
Yeah, you can certainly make the argument that from a just quality of life standpoint,
Yeah.
it would be a lot better for Ryan Day if he just found some other job and got the heck out of there, right? Because I've heard the stories from people on their staff, from people close to the program that his daughter's playing, a volleyball game and like people are chanting fire Ryan Day.
What?
That, people are coming up to his wife at the grocery store and, saying crazy things. Like, that's tough. That's not a great way to live. And when you're in that job and in that city and everything you do is so public, like, I think it could be very suffocating and mentally draining. And yeah, if he wanted to do that, I don't think anybody would blame him. And hey, if he left with a national championship, it'd be awesome. I think everybody would be happy, right? But at the same time, like, you go to that NFL meat grinder and you're hired to be fired, and you know, I don't know. I think it's a tough call. I just think for Ryan Day, he's got to figure out what he feels like is sustainable for himself and his family, and that's what he should do.
Wow. Obviously, Jacksonville, they're not going to go and hire another former Ohio State coach instantly, but I was just speculating.
Yeah,
So now on
sure.
to Marcus Freeman, which is a little more interesting because he got re-upped, which means nothing. And the Bears have now made it known they want to talk to him. I don't know. He seems like, I don't want to compare him to like a Mike Tomlin or a Mike Vrabel, but he seems like a leader of men. I'm sure you saw the halftime speech or the snippet of it that's floating around the web. Like, I want to play for Marcus Freeman. I like the guy. I think he would be a slam dunk hire in, say, Chicago. You know him much better than I do. It seems like him and his family are pretty ensconced, though, at Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think he probably stays this year and for a while longer, but I think he's definitely a guy when you look at his age and just the career arc that he could give the NFL a shot at some point, and I don't think anybody would be surprised about that. Certainly not surprised that NFL teams are interested in him when you look at everything he brings to the table, the way they've coached that team, the way they've built the program. I think, on game day, in terms of just little things on the margins, I think they've been great. I think his coaching decisions have been terrific. Early in his tenure, including this year when they played Northern Illinois, the issue for him and for Notre Dame was, why are they not getting up every single week to take care of business? I mean, there were some bad losses in there. There was a loss to Marshall, right? There
That's
was,
right.
there was a loss to a really bad Stanford team a couple years ago, and the only explanation was just like they weren't ready to play mentally, focus wise, intensity wise. And I think once they lost to Northern Illinois, that was not a problem the rest of the season. And they've looked great. And I think everyone who watches that team is impressed with the way he's coached them. So, yeah, he's definitely a guy the NFL could look at. I just don't think now is the right time for him. I think he's got to play this thing out a little more at Notre Dame, because I do think there's a little higher ceiling they could reach.
Yeah, he's younger than both of us, which is a little sad, and I hope I didn't just admit our age. All right, Dan Wolken, USA Today. Dan, get healthy for your 2025 tennis tour. We're
Yeah.
expecting to see you at the U.S. Open in August.
No, I'm in that 40 and up league.
Oh.
I try to be good in the 40 and up league. But it is what it is.
Have they tested the speed of your serve? Like, do you know it or no?
So there's a little app actually called Swing Vision that it gives you a lot of data on your game. You sort of record yourself. I don't know. I'm not a huge server. I mean, I'm only about 5'7", 5'8", so I don't generate a ton of pace off the serve. Way more off the ground. But I don't know. I can probably hit 100, but it's
Oh,
that's
okay.
that's not the strength of my game for sure.
What are you, a baseline guy? What's your game? I haven't played tennis in a minute, but I used to be a regular.
Aggressive baseliner, good off both wings, change in direction. The rest of it can be a little hit and miss,
So
but
you're not charging the net.
oh god, I try not to come into the net if I
Okay,
don't
what
have
about,
to.
are you more of a wall, or are you aiming for winners trying to paint lines?
Oh yeah, no, I'm more aggressive. I'm
Okay.
going for it. Yeah.
That's a weakness. Well, we got a guy here at on the herd, the social media guy, who's really good, played like seriously as a young player. And I was like, oh, I need a tune up for my. So he comes to play me, dude. I've never been double bageled before, and this was humiliating. Like, we couldn't even have. He's that good. He's much younger than us, but it was humbling. I haven't played much tennis since. Let's just put it that way. I'll
Well, we
stick to
all
ping
get double
pong.
bageled at some point, so.
Well, not you, not at your
Oh
level,
no,
but
I have been. Oh, I have been. I
it,
play.
it
Yeah, there's always somebody a lot better out there,
yeah, always. All
unless
right,
you're
man.
Carlos Alcaraz.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, Dan. Have a good one.
Thanks, Jason.